Have you ever wondered what it takes to get your dream podcast guest to say yes, even if you don't have a big following? In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you the exact steps that I used to land guests on my very first podcast, like Ben Greenfield, Noah Kagan, all before I ever had 100 episodes. And I also help my clients land their dream guests. For example, I had a retired police officer out of Wisconsin. He wanted to land somebody from the History Channel. This person was really famous and important to him, and we were able to do that within his first few episodes. So I'm going to show you how to do all this without needing 1 million downloads, because I have worked on shows that have crossed that 1 million download mark. And yes, it is easier at that point to land the types of guests that you might want. But what about for people who are starting from zero or who don't have that kind of traction? That is kind of the answer that I hope to give in this video. And don't worry, I'm going to give you a free guest booking template, which you can download in the description below and personalize it to your own needs. Okay, so the problem that we start out with is that we have no following, we don't have any credibility, we don't have maybe any existing episodes even, but we believe in the idea of our shows and we know that we can serve this person by showcasing their story. Okay, so let's start by defining who your dream guest is, because this is going to be different for everybody depending on the niche you're coming from, the industry you're in, and the goals that you have for your show. You want to begin by making a list of all of the names that would change the trajectory of your show. And you'd be surprised. Often this could be anywhere from 3 to 20 people that have the power to do this. It doesn't need to be hundreds and hundreds of guests. Once you have a bunch of different names in your niche and industry that you want to get in touch with, you want to begin categorizing them in terms of level of difficulty. So there will be some people that are harder to get in touch with, harder to book. It might take more proof before we're able to get a yes from them. But they're kind of on your nice to have list where if they said yes, it would absolutely blow your mind and you'd be really proud of yourself. I think it's worth having these types of guests on your list because it can change what you believe is possible. When you hear yeses from people that you never thought would even open your message or open your email, let alone say yes, it can completely break your mind in terms of being able to replicate that effect. Now, let me start by giving you a few metrics that these bigger guests in your niche are probably looking for. And this is something that people like Ali Abdaal or Noah Kagan have publicly said on threads or in YouTube videos. And you'll find that really big podcasters and YouTubers discuss this from time to time. It just never makes the clips. So one of the things that Ali Abdaal said, which Noah Kagan's version is very similar, is that he will be somebody's 50th episode. So he won't be your first, second, or third, but if you've done the work to get to 50, he'll consider actually coming on. And he knows how hard it is to even do 50 episodes because that's about a year of doing podcasts, to which most people probably don't even make it that far and never end up reaching back out. Noah Kagan's version is very similar. He says if there's a podcast that has 100 episodes or 100 reviews on Apple or Spotify, then he'll consider going on the show. And many guests have echoed this exact same metric of at least 100 episodes, where it just shows that you've been doing it for 1 to 2 years. It shows that you're serious enough about this thing where if this big name takes a risk on you and your brand and your show, it's not just going to be a wasted media appearance for them, another year or two later. Because remember, most podcasts don't make it past episode 3 or episode 7. So you can't blame this really big guest for wanting to have some measure of security if they come and do your show. The other obvious thing that gets them to say yes is if you already have a critical mass accumulated on one platform. So if you have 10K, 50K followers on Threads or on X or Instagram, it is just a bit more proof, social proof that shows, hey, this is a safe risk to take. This person is proven. I'm not endangering my brand or reputation by associating with this show. But again, we're assuming, okay, we're not waiting till 100 episodes to... So of course, the goal is to solve that 100 episode or 100 review problem, because if you get there, it opens up a lot of doors for you. But in the meantime, what do you do? And this is where I found the strategy to work that I want to share with you, which is called web working. So it's the idea of finding people who are connected to each other, who lead to the person that you really want to talk to. I was able to do this on my very first podcast when I was 22. I was doing this out of my childhood bedroom. I literally was beginning to talk to, less famous professional athletes, less famous coaches, but still some that had a lot of respect in the community. And all it took was 3 people. Okay, when I had 3 names next to each other where I could say, hey, just so you know, this person, and this person also happened to come on the show. Their episode did really well. Here's a link to that episode. This led me to landing the fittest man on earth from the CrossFit Games of that year before I even hit 10 total episodes. And this shows you the power of associations. So if you have a couple really big names, once you have that, you'll find it's way easier to get yeses from the biggest people that you never thought would even consider your pitch. And the core theme behind this is the same thing that having a really big following somewhere does. It ensures social proof, right? It ensures that there's safety in taking this risk. Okay, I'm not the first person to say yes to this. My competitor or somebody I really respect, one of my peers, also said yes to this. This must be a safe show or a safe place to go on. And I know it sounds kind of shallow, but it doesn't have to be, because the way that I was doing this at the time was so genuine, because I was so thirsty for knowledge. I was so obsessed with trying to kind of find the links, right? So for example, if I talked to a really famous coach and I asked him who his mentors were, who he looked up to, the names that he would mention, I would make sure to actually go read their books, consume their media, and then invite them onto the show as well. And so that would be a big deal, because some of the guests that I had on, they would have their mentors. They were like, whoa, I can't believe that person said yes. And they would come back and listen to those episodes. So it's a way for you to earn massive respect and at the same time just be chasing your curiosity, because that's what I was doing. And this concept, by the way, is not mine. I heard Tim Ferriss say it years and years ago, where he was talking, he named it something else, but it was just the idea of getting people who are connected to each other. So what you want to do here is make it easy for your guests to say yes. And if you can gather even 3 people that they know or they have heard of, they have associated with in some way, guess what? It becomes way easier for them to actually do that. So the web working concept is essential. You really can't get around it if you are trying to land really big guests and you don't have a giant following or an established brand already. This is something that you're going to have to use anyways. And if you look at the biggest podcasts that are out there, when they all launch, they use a lot of these same tactics. They go on other shows where there's already a really big following. They're a guest on those shows, right? They're able to land really big guests right away because they're an established household name. But when you are not, you have to take the approach of just curating and synthesizing knowledge for that specific community. So in my case, it was the CrossFit community and the weightlifting community. They were each different communities at the time, but I really wanted to kind of bridge them together, and I kind of bounced back and forth between the two. And by doing this, people really came to my show to listen to all of the big names. They weren't coming for me at first, but over time, they decided to stay for me because I was able to use the really big guests as a way to bring in a lot of new people. The other thing I want to highlight is follower count. So don't let follower count fool you, because I had somebody who had, let's say, 350,000 plus followers on Instagram. And when they shared my episode and all this kind of stuff, the transfer over to new followers, new listeners, new subscribers was not as significant as you think. But somebody who had 49,000 followers on Instagram was able to drive way more traffic to my podcast. I got like 10,000 downloads overnight, and it was just not something that you would be able to predict when you're scanning through people's feeds. And of course, the final part that's going to make the biggest difference is going to be your script. You would be surprised at how many times people do not really think over this part and how it's going to be received and how the other person is going to, consume it. If you can nail your script, there's 2 different fashions that you want to kind of become good at. You want to get good at email and you want to get good at DMs, because I have landed people through the DMs that was just literally 2 or 3 sentences. And then that led me to basically getting permission to send something to their email where I had kind of my longer or more detailed pitch. So I think it's worth having a script for both scenarios. There's 2 main parts to this script that I think you need to manipulate in order to give it the best chance to succeed. The number 1 thing is going to be your opening paragraph. So don't waste time here saying who you are and what podcast you're from or business you own. Get straight into complimenting them on a specific aspect of their content. So open up the paragraph with a sentence that signals how big of a fan you are. And you're not just going to do that by saying, oh, I'm the biggest fan, because guess what? Everybody says that. You want to say something like, hey, I've consumed over 100 hours of your content since 2015. That is a very detailed opener. You're like, whoa, this person kind of knows me. Or let's say that you have bought a bunch of their courses or books and you've, been a customer of theirs. You can say, hey, I've been a longtime customer since this time, or, I just bought your book and this one part in particular resonated with me and it changed my entire outlook because of this reason. When you get detailed like that, it signals that you're not just mass sending out these invites. And what's really strange is most people can pick up if something is not really thought out and it's not genuine. So if you are getting somebody else to send these on your behalf, or you are sending out mass invites, that will show. And so this first paragraph is a way for you to kind of make sure that you stand out, make sure that 1, you get the open, and you at least get them to read the second paragraph, which is where you might begin to introduce your show and the fact that you want them on. So once you have covered the bases in your opening paragraph and really established that you are somebody who's not just the average person asking them to come on the show, the second part you want to make sure to personalize is the example episodes that you send over. So even when I had 10 episodes for that very first podcast, I now had some variety. So if I reached out to, let's say, a world-class weightlifting coach, guess what? Some of the people that would appeal to him are going to be the other weightlifting coaches that I talk to, not necessarily maybe a famous CrossFit athlete, right? But when I'm reaching out to the world, like the world's fittest man of that year, it actually helped to have, one really famous weightlifting coach, 2 really big athletes that I already had on. You can begin to kind of put together a series of, it's almost like putting together a recipe for what's going to get them to say yes. And what I loved was when I crossed 10, 20, 30 episodes, when you have more than 3, 5, 7 big names, guess what? When you start rattling them off, after 5 or 6, when you type it all out, it begins to be like, okay, I do this all day, every day. Like, you don't want to miss this. You want to be a part of this. And you would be surprised. People actually have that feeling where they're like, oh, I'm having FOMO. I don't want to miss out on this. If my competitor is on this show, I want to get my chance to be on this show. So coming back to that concept of web working, you're going to make sure to do that in a very strategic way, depending on who you're talking to. And then as you have bigger and bigger names, you can swap out some of these guests. So you're not always using the exact same combo. As you have bigger names on your show, you begin to plug in those episodes or those names as well. Again, make sure to download my free template below for booking podcast guests. It's a very easy plug and play template that you can fill out, and you can, delete some stuff, add some stuff, make it feel like you. But I think it's a great starting point that has worked for me, my clients, and a lot of people over the years. So give it a whirl. And if you do, make sure to come back and let me know, because I want to hear how it turns out. The 2 other quick notes I have for you. 1, make sure you don't hand this off to somebody else, okay? You don't want to have somebody who's like your agent or whatever reaching out on behalf, because I get those pitches all the time. My clients get those pitches all the time. Guess what? We rarely ever say yes to a single one of those. No matter how busy you are, take the time to do that outreach yourself. Or if you are going to have an assistant or somebody do it, have them sign off with your own name, because it does totally land differently if you have somebody doing it on your behalf. And it's a pitch where you weren't asked to pitch. It's a cold pitch. So you don't want to leave room for that kind of error. And the next thing is one of the most important lessons, but probably the simplest, is following up. I've told this story before, but my dream internship that I was able to land, I met that CEO on episode 13 of that first podcast. And I would not have gotten that CEO on the show if I didn't follow up, because every interaction we had took like 1 to 2 weeks of back and forth. Okay. So it took over 2 to 3 months before I actually got him on the show. And guess what? When he showed up the first time, he didn't show. So it was a no-show. And I still followed up and tried to get him back on. And I think about that all the time, because if I never followed up, that guest led me to opening so many doors, including the internship, and then the dream job that I was able to get after that, which was, with a separate CEO. But still, that episode was so pivotal for my podcast because of how much I respected this person, how much I wanted to be a part of this company, how much I, cared about it, to where if I just assumed, hey, this person's read it, they're not interested, like, screw it, I guess I'm not landing them. It scares me to think all the things that may not have actually happened because of that. So take your shot, because if they're not going to respond anyways, like, what do you have to lose, right? And you're not being annoying, so you can space this out in a way where you give them a few days. So 2 to 3 days later, you have your first follow-up. Then your next follow-up is another 7 days later. And then you kind of repeat that every 7 to 14 days. And the goal is to just get them to a decision. So with a lot of people, what's going to happen, especially if they are famous, and remember, the goal isn't to just get them to say yes, it's to get them to a decision. So you're going to find that there are really big guests sometimes who they're booked out like 3, 6, 9 months in advance, especially if you are going after, let's say, authors who just released a book, okay? And remember, the goal is to just get to a decision with these bigger guests. It's not really to get a yes right away. It's to get them to tell you, hey, if I don't want to be on your show right now, would you be willing to tell me, when you would consider it again? And sometimes you'll get an explicit answer like, hey, when you hit 100 episodes, hit me back, right? Or, hey, I'm done my podcast tour right now, but, for my next book or, my next season, I'll come back on. Because I found this with authors in particular, is they go really hard on their press tours and they're going to be doing a ton of podcasts. They're open to it. But all of a sudden, when they're kind of burned out after a few months, or the book is already a bestseller now, there's less incentive for them to actually go on and do more appearances. So if somebody tells you, hey, reach back out to me next September, that's not a no. That's something that you make a note of and you actually follow up on that. But I have to point this out because I see this over and over. So many people just assume in today's day and age that because we're around our phones all the time, that we actually see every message, every DM, every email that's coming through. Guess what? Even if sometimes you see that pitch, you might not respond to it right away in the moment. You might be like, oh my gosh, I just got invited onto a podcast, right? You might be excited about it, but you might forget to reply right away. And so you want to give the guest an opportunity to reply in case it got buried in their inbox, because I guarantee you their inbox is way busier than yours. And you are doing them a favor by reminding them and bringing that thread back up to the top. And the final thing that I want to leave you with is to make sure that one strategy I didn't cover, but I didn't because I figured you're not going to use it, is paying guests. So there's plenty of instances where people pay podcast guests, similar to when you pay somebody to speak at a keynote, right? So that is certainly a strategy that is on the table. And if you have a really big budget, you can absolutely land some insane names. So if you take a look at a brand like Whoop, okay, the Whoop strap, they work with really famous athletes like Ronaldo, LeBron, Michael Phelps. All these people were like some of their first clients, right? And so on the Whoop podcast, they have very, very, very big athletes. And I'm guessing that it's not free. It might be if it's a part of their contract and their deal, but there is probably some kind of sponsorship in place for these athletes, one, wearing the Whoop, and two, publicly being able to, showcase that they wear it and, being able to come on the pod and stand behind it. And so that's an example of where a guest might be being paid to make sure to come on. Even if it's not directly for that podcast appearance, it's a part of the sponsorship expectations, right? It's like, hey, you're sponsored by Whoop. You're going to come do an appearance on the pod and make us look good and, take a bunch of photos with us whenever we ask you to, or a few times a year. I don't know how their contract works, but that's just an example. And there are countless others. But I didn't want to harp on that too much because I figured it's not something that is going to be something worth considering until maybe a few years in. And my final note is for you to actually believe that you have something to offer. So I know it can be very easy to be like, why would this person want to talk to me? Why would they say yes? On one hand, you feel like they should and they might and they would. And on the other hand, you're like, there's no chance, right? And so in those moments, I want you to really try to script an episode with a couple great questions that would yield great clips and great sound bites. Because the guest is likely going to ask you to send over some questions ahead of time. This is becoming more and more common over the years. It was something that maybe wasn't as prevalent in 2016, but nowadays, especially when everybody's worried about being thrown curveballs or getting canceled, they want to make sure they have some time to prepare and be their best selves, especially if this will be on YouTube and this will get turned into a clip and it has a chance to go viral. People don't want to become memes. So if you can have questions listed out ahead of time, a lot of times in your script, when you reach out to somebody, those questions can be the convincer because people are like, whoa, these are not generic questions. These are actually great ones that I want to speak on. I want some footage out there about me talking about some of these talking points. So it can be really useful to do your thinking ahead of time and present your best stuff, even in the pitch itself. 3 good questions that you want to cover. So it shows that you're not just looking to borrow their audience power. You are looking to have a genuine conversation and place them in the best light possible as well. So again, make sure to download your free guest booking template in the description below. I appreciate you hanging out. Make sure to reach back out when you land some of your dream guests. I want to hear all about it. And thank you for spending time with me today, and I'll see you on the next one.